Good evening, and welcome to Bedtime Sleep Story. Tonight, let us settle in together and wander slowly through the long, warm history of ancient Rome. This is a world of marble and lamplight, of paved roads winding over hills, of fountains murmuring in quiet courtyards and ships drifting across a calm sea. We will pass through bustling forums and silent temples, past soldiers on distant frontiers, and families gathered around a simple supper. There's nothing here to hurry for. All of it happened long, long ago, and every story has already found its ending, so you can simply let it drift past you, like the slow current of the Tiber under an evening sky. If these quiet journeys help you rest, a gentle like or a follow, lets other tired minds find a softer place to land too. But for now, there is nothing you need to do. Loosen your shoulders, let your eyes grow heavy, and let the cares of the day fall away behind you. Let your breathing slow and soften. And as the oil lamps are lit across the sleeping city, let us begin. Rome grew from a small village into the heart of a vast empire. It began as a cluster of huts on a few hills beside a river, home to farmers and shepherds. Over many centuries it grew, slowly and steadily, until it ruled lands stretching from the misty edges of Britain to the deserts of the East. At its height, it governed perhaps 60 or 70 million people, a great patchwork of tongues and customs, all bound together under a single name. Yet, it never forgot its humble beginnings. The Romans told fond stories of their founders and kept ancient huts as treasured relics. From a quiet riverside settlement rose one of the largest and most enduring states the world has ever known. It is a story of patience as much as power, of a small place that grew century by century into something almost beyond imagining. According to legend, Rome was founded by twin brothers raised by a wolf. The old story tells of two infants, Romulus and Remus, set adrift on the river and left to die, only to be found and nursed by a she-wolf in the wild. They grew strong and in time resolved to build a city of their own upon the hills where they had been saved. But the brothers quarreled over which hill to choose, and in the end only one of them, Romulus, gave his name to the new city of Rome. This tender and dramatic tale was cherished by the Romans, who saw in it the wild origins of their greatness. The image of the wolf and the twins appeared on coins and statues for centuries. Whether true or not, it was the story they loved to tell of how their long and remarkable history first began. For centuries, Rome was not ruled by emperors, but governed as a republic. After casting out its early kings, Rome became a republic, a state in which power was shared rather than held by one man alone. Officials were elected to serve for limited terms, and a council of elders called the Senate guided the affairs of the city. The Romans were deeply proud of the system and wary of anyone who reached for too much power. The famous letters that stood for the Roman state meant, in spirit, the Senate and the people of Rome, a reminder that authority rested with them both. This republic lasted for nearly 500 years, through growth and crisis alike. Only later did it give way to rule by emperors. But the memory of the republic, with its shared power and its proud citizens, never entirely faded from the Roman mind. The Roman Forum was the beating heart of the city's public life. Set in a valley between the hills, the Forum was a broad, open space surrounded by temples, law courts, and grand public buildings. Here, Romans gathered to trade, to hear speeches, to settle disputes, and to catch up on the news of the day. Senators debated, merchants haggled, priests performed ceremonies, and crowds drifted through it all. Over the centuries, it filled with monuments, arches, and columns raised to honor gods and great deeds. It was noisy, lively, and full of purpose, the very center of Roman affairs. Today, its broken columns and worn stones stand quiet beneath the sun, but once they echoed with the voices of a whole city. To picture old Rome is to picture the Forum at midday, busy and bright, the living center of an entire world. The Romans built the mighty Colosseum, a vast arena for public spectacles. This enormous oval of stone and concrete could seat tens of thousands of spectators who came to watch games, contests, and grand displays. Its clever design allowed huge crowds to enter and leave with ease through numbered archways, much like a modern stadium. Beneath the arena floor lay a maze of tunnels and chambers, where animals and performers waited to be lifted up into the light. A great awning could even be stretched overhead to shade the crowd from the sun. The games held there were free, paid for by emperors seeking the people's favor. Though much of it has crumbled over the long centuries, the Colosseum still stands today, vast and dignified, one of the most recognized buildings in the world, a quiet monument to the grand public life of ancient Rome. Gladiators fought in the arena, and the best of them became famous. These fighters, often enslaved people or prisoners, were trained in special schools to battle one another and wild beasts before roaring crowds. They fought with different weapons and styles, and skilled gladiators could win great fame, almost like the celebrated athletes of today. Their faces appeared on lamps and cups, and children played with little figures of them. Contrary to popular belief, not every match ended in death, for a trained gladiator was valuable and expensive, and many fights were meant to display skill rather than to kill. Some gladiators even won their freedom in the end. It was a hard and dangerous life, bound up with cruelty, yet it held its moments of glory. The crowds adored their heroes of the sand, whose names were spoken with the same passion we give our champions now. The Romans were passionate about chariot racing above all other sports. In a vast arena called the Circus Maximus, teams of horses thundered around a long track, while immense crowds cheered them on. It could hold 250,000 spectators, far more than any arena today, packed together in roaring excitement. The charioteers belonged to teams known by their colors, and fans supported their favorites with a devotion much like that of modern sports clubs. The races were fast and dangerous, with crashes and daring overtakes, and the greatest charioteers became rich and famous. Bets were placed, rivalries ran deep, and the whole city could be swept up in the passion of a race day. To imagine the noise of that crowd, the dust and the pounding hooves, is to feel the beating excitement of Rome at play, an entire city holding its breath as the chariots flew past. Roman roads were so well built that some survive to this day. The Romans were master road builders, laying down a network of paved highways that stretched across their whole empire, tens of thousands of miles in all. These roads were made in careful layers of stone, gravel, and sand, slightly raised in the middle so the rain would drain away. They ran as straight as possible across the land, over hills and through marshes, to speed the movement of armies, messengers, and traders. Milestones marked the distances, and inns offered rest along the way. So sturdy were these roads that parts of them still exist after 2,000 years, and many modern routes follow their ancient paths. The old saying that all roads lead to Rome was nearly true, for they spread out from the city like the spokes of a great wheel, binding the empire together. Roman aqueducts carried fresh water for many miles into the cities. To supply their towns with clean water, the Romans built remarkable channels that ran from distant springs and hills, sometimes for 50 or 60 miles. The water flowed gently downhill the whole way, guided by a slope so gradual and so precisely measured that it remains astonishing today. Where valleys lay in the path, the channels were carried high upon rows of graceful stone arches, some of which still stand beautiful against the sky. This water-filled public fountains fed the great baths and even reached some private homes. A large city might receive enormous quantities of fresh water each day, a luxury unmatched for centuries afterward. The aqueducts were among Rome's proudest achievements, a marriage of beauty and use. Their tall arches striding across the countryside remain one of the most elegant images the ancient world has left us. The Romans invented a kind of concrete that has lasted for ages. By mixing lime, volcanic ash, and water with stones, they created a building material of remarkable strength. This Roman concrete could be shaped into walls, domes, and arches, and it grew harder over time. Astonishingly, some of it has endured for 2,000 years, including structures that have stood through earthquakes and the constant battering of the sea. Modern scientists have studied it with great interest, for in some ways, it has outlasted concrete made today. With this material, the Romans raised enormous buildings that would have been impossible in stone alone. It allowed them to roof vast spaces and to build on a scale never seen before. Much of the grandeur of Rome rested quite literally upon this humble gray mixture, a quiet invention that helped their greatest monuments stand firm across the long centuries. The Pantheon in Rome still has the largest unreinforced concrete dome on Earth. This magnificent temple, built to honor all the gods, is crowned by a vast, rounded dome that has stood for nearly 1,900 years. At its very center is a round opening, open to the sky, which lets in a soft shaft of light that moves slowly across the interior through the day. When it rains, the water falls gently through and drains away through small holes in the floor. The dome was a masterpiece of engineering, made lighter toward the top with clever materials so it would not collapse under its own weight. Remarkably, the Pantheon has remained in continuous use across all these centuries, never falling into ruin. To stand beneath its great curve, watching the circle of daylight drift overhead, is to feel the calm and confident genius of Roman builders still alive in the quiet. The Roman army was one of the most disciplined fighting forces in history. Its soldiers, the legionaries, were professionals, trained hard and drilled until they moved as one. They marched vast distances carrying their own armor, weapons, food, and tools, and at the end of each day, they built a fortified camp before they slept. Their strength lay not only in courage, but in order, in their ability to hold formation and follow commands without breaking. They fought behind large shields, locked together, advancing in steady lines. This discipline, more than any single weapon, won Rome its empire. Yet the legionary was also a builder, laying roads and raising walls in times of peace. He served for many years, and, on retiring, was often given land or money. The quiet power of the Roman army lay in its patience and order, a calm machine that shaped the ancient world. Roman soldiers carried everything they needed and built a camp every night. On the march, a legionary bore a heavy load upon his back. His armor and weapons, cooking pot and rations, digging tools and stakes, sometimes weighing as much as he did. They were nicknamed fondly the mules of the army for all that they carried. At the end of a day's march, however far they had come, They did not simply lie down to rest. Instead, they dug ditches, raised banks, and set up a fortified camp, laid out always to the same orderly plan, so that any soldier would know his way around it. Inside, the tents stood in neat rows, like a small temporary town. By morning, it was struck, and they moved on. This steady discipline, repeated night after night, kept them safe and ready, and was one of the quiet secrets of their strength. The Romans loved their public baths, which were places to relax and socialize. Bathing was not merely about washing, but was a daily pleasure and a social occasion. The great public baths were vast complexes with a series of rooms: a warm room, a hot, steamy room, and a cool plunge, moving the bather gently through changing temperatures. But they were far more than that. They held exercise yards, gardens, libraries, and spaces to sit and talk, where people of all ranks gathered to pass the afternoon. Entry cost only a small coin, so nearly everyone could enjoy them. Friends met there, business was discussed, and the whole community mingled in the warm, echoing halls. The baths were heated by clever systems beneath the floors, filling the rooms with gentle warmth. To the Roman, an afternoon at the baths was one of the simple, civilized comforts of life. Many Roman buildings were warmed by an early form of central heating. The Romans devised a clever way to heat their baths and finer homes from below. They raised the floors on small brick pillars, leaving a hollow space underneath, and led the heat from a furnace through this gap and up through channels in the walls. The warmth spread gently and evenly through the rooms above, rising through floors and walls alike. It was a quiet and ingenious comfort, requiring a steady fire and the labor of those who tended it. With this system, the Romans could enjoy warm rooms even in the cold of a northern winter, far from the mild Mediterranean sun. The remains of these heating systems can still be seen today, the little stacks of brick standing in neat rows beneath vanished floors. It was a thoughtful touch of comfort, 2,000 years ahead of its time. Ordinary Romans in the city often lived in tall apartment blocks. While the wealthy enjoyed spacious houses, most city dwellers lived in crowded buildings several stories high, divided into many small rented rooms. The ground floors often held shops, while families lived above. These apartment blocks could be cramped and noisy, and the upper floors, cheaper and harder to reach, were the least comfortable. Cooking was risky in such close quarters. So many people bought hot food from the street instead. Life there was busy and communal, with neighbors close on every side. In some ways, it is a surprisingly familiar picture. A great city of apartment dwellers, of shops below and homes above, of people living stacked together amid the bustle. The Romans, like us, knew the particular life of the crowded city, with all its closeness, its conveniences, and its constant, humming activity from dawn until dark. Wealthy Romans built beautiful houses arranged around open courtyards. The fine townhouse of a rich family was turned inward, away from the noisy street toward quiet open spaces within. Near the entrance lay a hall open to the sky, with a shallow pool at its center to catch the rain. Deeper inside, a colonnaded garden offered shade, greenery, and the sound of a fountain. Rooms for dining, sleeping, and receiving guests opened off these calm central spaces. The walls were often painted with rich scenes, and the floors laid with intricate mosaics. It was a peaceful and elegant way to live, the bustle of the city shut out, the heart of the home filled with light and air and the murmur of water. To rest in such a house was to be cool, private, and surrounded by beauty, a gentle retreat at the center of a crowded world. Romans decorated their floors with intricate pictures made of tiny stones. These mosaics, formed from thousands of small colored pieces, pressed into mortar, covered the floors of homes, baths, and temples, and they showed scenes of gods and heroes, animals and plants, daily life in the sea, or simply elegant patterns. Skilled craftsmen pieced them together with great patience, stone by tiny stone, like a slow and beautiful puzzle. Because they were made of durable stone, many have survived remarkably well, their colors still bright after 2,000 years beneath the earth. To uncover a Roman mosaic is to look down upon a picture exactly as Roman eyes once saw it. Some even bore friendly messages, welcoming guests or playfully warning of the dog. These quiet works of art, worn smooth by ancient feet, remain among the most charming and personal traces of how the Romans lived and what they found beautiful. The Romans wrote with a pointed stylus on tablets coated in wax. For everyday notes, letters, and lessons, they used small wooden tablets filled with a layer of soft wax. With a pointed metal tool called a stylus, they scratched their words into the wax, and with its flat other end, they could smooth the surface to erase and begin again. It was a simple, reusable notebook, perfect for sums, reminders, and school exercises. For more lasting documents, they wrote in ink on papyrus or thin sheets, and important records were carved in stone or bronze. Children learning their letters practiced endlessly on these wax tablets, just as we once used slates. It is a homely image, a Roman child, tongue between teeth, carefully scratching out the alphabet, then smoothing it away to try once more. Across all the centuries, the patient work of learning to write looked much as it always has. Latin, the language of Rome, became the parent of many modern tongues. As Rome spread across the lands around the Mediterranean and beyond, its language traveled with it, taking root in the daily speech of distant provinces. Over the long centuries after Rome's power faded, this everyday Latin slowly changed and divided, growing into new languages. From it descended several of the tongues spoken by hundreds of millions of people today. Even languages not born from Latin borrowed a great many words from it. And in science, medicine, and law, Latin terms are still used the world over. So although no one grows up speaking the old language of Rome today, its voice has never really fallen silent. It lives on, transformed, in the words on countless lips each day. The speech of those ancient farmers and senators echoes still quietly in much of how the modern world talks. Julius Caesar was a brilliant general who changed Rome forever. A gifted commander and a clever politician, Caesar rose to great power through his conquests and his popularity with the common people and the army. He led his legions far to the north and west, winning vast new lands for Rome, and wrote his own famous account of those campaigns. In time, he gathered so much power into his own hands that he ruled almost as a king, which alarmed those who cherished the old republic. His life ended suddenly and dramatically, but his name lived on. So great was his fame that the very word for emperor in several later languages came from his name. Caesar stood at the turning point between the old republic and the age of emperors that followed. His story, full of ambition and consequence, remained one of the most told in all of Roman history. Augustus became the first Roman emperor and brought a long peace. After the troubled years that followed Julius Caesar, his adopted heir gradually gathered authority and became, in time, the first emperor of Rome, taking the name Augustus. He was careful and patient, preferring to keep the outward forms of the old republic, even as he held the real power himself. Under his long rule began a remarkable era of stability and peace across the Roman world, a calm that would last, more or less, for 2 centuries. He famously boasted that he had found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, for he adorned it with many fine new buildings. Wise and long-lived, Augustus set the empire on a steady course. His reign was remembered as a golden age, a time of quiet order after long years of strife. Two of our calendar months are named after Roman rulers. The Romans gave us much of the calendar we still use today, with its 12 months and its system of leap years, reformed under Julius Caesar to follow the sun more closely. In gratitude and honor, two of the months were named after great Romans. One bears the name of Julius Caesar himself, and the next, the name of the Emperor Augustus. So every year, twice over, we quietly speak the names of these ancient men without even thinking of it. Several of the other month names also come from Latin, some simply meaning their old position in the year. It is a gentle thread of continuity, this calendar, linking our ordinary days to the Romans who shaped them. Each time we name the month, we touch, without knowing it, a small and lasting piece of ancient Rome. The Romans wrote their numbers with letters, a system we still see today. Instead of the digits we use now, the Romans counted with combinations of letters, where certain letters stood for certain values, and their position showed whether to add or subtract. It was well suited to carving on stone and keeping simple records, though awkward for difficult sums. We still meet these numerals all around us, on clock faces, on the cornerstones of buildings, in the names of kings and queens, and to mark the chapters of books. They lend a certain dignity and weight wherever they appear. Though they have long given way to easier numbers for daily use, they have never quite disappeared. There is something pleasing in it, that a way of counting from ancient Rome should still quietly mark our hours and our pages, a small inheritance carried gently down the ages. Roman law laid the foundation for legal systems still used today. The Romans were great makers of law, and over the centuries, they built up a vast and careful body of rules to govern their society. They wrote down their earliest laws on tablets set up in public, so that all might know them. They developed ideas of contracts, property, rights, and fair procedure, and trained skilled lawyers and judges to apply them. Much of this legal thinking was later gathered and organized into great collections that scholars studied for ages afterward. Many principles of modern law in much of the world can trace their roots back to Rome, including the idea that a person should be considered innocent until proven guilty. It was one of Rome's most lasting gifts, this patient work of justice. The quiet reasoning of Roman lawyers still shapes, in countless ways, how fairness is sought today. The Romans worshipped many gods, with one for nearly every need. At the head of their many gods stood the great Sky Father, ruler of the heavens, alongside his queen and a host of other divine figures. A god of war, a goddess of love, a messenger god, a goddess of wisdom, and many more. Each watched over a part of life or nature, and each had temples, festivals, and offerings. The Romans were careful to keep the gods content, believing that the welfare of the state depended on their favor. Their gods closely resembled those of the Greeks, whose stories they adopted and adapted. Religion was woven into public life, marking the calendar with holy days and ceremonies. To the Roman, the divine was everywhere, in the home, the city, the fields, and the sky. A vast company of watchful powers to be honored, thanked, and gently kept on one side. Every Roman home kept small gods to watch over the household. Beyond the great gods of the temples, each family honored its own private spirits, the gentle guardians of the home, the storeroom, and the family's fortune. A little shrine stood in the house, sometimes beautifully painted, where offerings of food, wine, and incense were made to these household gods. They were thought to protect the family and its daily life, present at meals and at important moments. The spirit of the hearth fire was tended with special care, for the fire was the heart of the home. This was a warm and intimate kind of faith, lived not in grand temples but at the family table. Each day, with simple offerings and quiet words, the Romans asked their little household gods to keep watch over those they loved, a tender devotion at the very center of home. The sacred fire of Rome was tended by priestesses called the Vestal Virgins. In a small round temple in the heart of the city burned a holy flame that was never allowed to go out, for it was believed to protect the safety of Rome itself. This fire was guarded by a select group of priestesses, the Vestals, chosen as girls to serve for many years. They lived in honor and dignity, holding privileges granted to no other women in Rome, and were treated with great respect. Their chief duty was to keep the sacred flame burning, day and night, year after year. So long as it burned, it was felt. Rome was safe. There is something deeply calming in the thought. A quiet temple, a steady flame, and the watchful priestesses tending it through the centuries, keeping alight the gentle heart fire of an entire city. A victorious Roman general might be honored with a grand parade called a triumph. When a commander won a great victory, the highest honor he could receive was a triumph, a magnificent procession through the streets of Rome. He rode in a chariot, crowned and robed, while his soldiers marched behind him, and the spoils of war were displayed to the cheering crowds. Captives, treasures, and images of conquered lands all passed before the people in a great spectacle of glory. It was the proudest day of a general's life. The whole city turned out to celebrate him. Yet tradition held that a companion stood behind him in the chariot, quietly reminding him that he was, after all, only a man. There is wisdom in that gentle whisper amid the cheering. Even at the height of triumph, the Romans remembered that glory fades and that all men are mortal in the end. The eagle was the proud symbol carried before every Roman legion. Each legion of the army bore a standard topped with a silver or golden eagle, which was treasured as the very soul of the unit. It was carried by a chosen soldier of great honor and guarded with fierce devotion. To lose the eagle to the enemy was the deepest disgrace a legion could suffer, and Rome would go to great lengths to win a lost one back. The soldiers rallied around their eagle in battle and felt bound to it as to their home. This proud emblem of the eagle, wings spread, became one of the lasting images of Roman power, copied by many later nations. To the legionary far from home, the eagle was a comfort and a duty, a bright symbol held above the ranks, reminding him of who he was and the city he served. The Romans enjoyed a varied diet built around bread, olives, and wine. For most people, the foundation of every meal was bread, eaten with whatever else could be had. Olives and olive oil were everywhere, used in cooking, for light, and even for cleaning the skin. Wine, usually watered down, was the common drink at all tables. To these were added vegetables, cheese, eggs, fruit, and fish, while meat was more of a treat for ordinary folk. The wealthy, of course, dined far more richly, enjoying many courses and exotic delicacies. The Romans grew, traded, and prized a great range of foods from across their empire. A simple supper of bread, olives, cheese, and a cup of watered wine was the quiet daily fare of millions, eaten in the cool of the evening, plain and satisfying after a long day's work beneath the southern sun. The Romans flavored much of their food with a fermented fish sauce. One of their most beloved seasonings was a salty, savory sauce made from fish, prepared in great quantities along the coasts and traded across the empire. It was added to all manner of dishes to deepen their flavor, much as we might use salt or a savory sauce today. To modern ears, its making sounds strong indeed, yet the result was prized and even costly in its finer forms. Different grades were sold, from everyday to luxury, and it appeared on tables rich and poor alike. This humble sauce reveals how much the Romans cared about the taste of their food and how far they would go to make it rich and satisfying. It is a small, vivid detail of daily life that across their whole vast empire, a single savory flavor tied so many Roman meals together. Romans dined while reclining on couches around a low table. For a proper meal, especially among the well off, one did not sit upright, but lay back upon cushioned couches set around the food. Guests reclined on their left side, eating with their right hand in a posture of relaxed ease. The dining room held three broad couches arranged around a central table, each seating several diners. Servants brought the courses, and the meal could stretch long into the evening, filled with conversation, wine, and sometimes music or entertainment. To recline at dinner was a mark of comfort and civilized leisure, a way of turning a meal into a gathering. There's a pleasant, unhurried quality to the picture. Friends stretched out at their ease in the lamplight, talking softly over good food and watered wine, the evening drifting gently on with no reason at all to hurry. A great deal of Roman life was supported by the labor of the enslaved. Slavery was woven deeply into the Roman world, and enslaved people did much of its work in the fields, the mines, the workshops, and the homes. Some led harsh and bitter lives, especially those who toiled in the countryside or underground. Others, particularly in city households, held positions of trust as teachers, secretaries, doctors, and managers, and a few lived in relative comfort. Importantly, enslaved people in Rome could sometimes gain their freedom, whether bought, earned, or granted by their owners. Those who were freed became part of Roman society, and their children could be full citizens. It was a hard and unequal world, and we should not look away from that. Yet within it ran this thread of possible release, a path by which some, in time, might come to walk free. Freed slaves and their children could rise to become respected citizens. When an enslaved person was given their freedom, they did not simply vanish from notice, but became a freedman, a recognized member of Roman society with real rights. They often kept a bond with their former owner, but they could now work for themselves, own property, and raise a family. Some freedmen grew wealthy and successful in trade or business, prospering greatly, and while a former slave carried the mark of their past, their freeborn children faced no such limit and could become full citizens of Rome, even rising to positions of honor. This possibility of movement gave Roman society a certain flexibility. The grandchild of someone once enslaved might stand as a proud and equal citizen. It was far from a fair world, yet it held in this a quiet door through which fortunes could across generations gently change. The Roman father held great authority as the head of the household. The Roman family was led by its eldest male, who held a position of considerable power over his wife, children, and household. In law, his authority was wide, touching property, marriage, and the affairs of the family. Yet, in daily life, this power was usually softened by love and custom. and a good father was expected to be caring and just, guiding his family with wisdom rather than harshness. The family was the basic building block of Roman society, and its bonds were taken seriously. Ancestors were honored, their images kept in the home, and family loyalty was a deep and abiding value. For all the formal authority of the father, the Roman household was, at its best, a close and affectionate place, where parents and children, grandparents and kin lived bound together by duty and by love. Roman children wore a special charm to protect them as they grew. From birth, a Roman child was given a small protective amulet, often a little pouch or locket worn around the neck, believed to guard them from harm and ill fortune. Children wore this charm throughout their early years, a quiet comfort and shield. When a boy came of age and put on the plain white garment of a man, he would set his childhood charm aside in a small ceremony, a gentle marking of growing up. Girls, too, set theirs aside, often at marriage. Beyond the charm, children had toys and games much like any other: dolls, hoops, knucklebones, and small carved animals. They went to school or learned at home and played in the streets and gardens. It is a tender image, this little charm worn close, a parent's hope for safety hung gently about a child's neck. A Roman citizen often had three names, each with its own meaning. Unlike many peoples, a Roman man typically carried three names: a personal first name, a family or clan name, and often a third name that marked his particular branch of the family or some personal trait. The middle name, the clan name, was the most important, tying him to a great extended family. Some of these third names began as nicknames, describing an ancestor's appearance or character, and were then passed down with pride. This careful system of names reflected how much the Romans valued family and ancestry. To know a man's full name was to know his place in the long web of Roman kinship. Women's names followed their own patterns, often taken from the family name. Behind each Roman name lay a quiet history, a thread reaching back through generations of fathers and forefathers. The toga was the formal dress of the Roman citizen, and not easy to wear. This large draped garment of white wool was the proud mark of a Roman citizen, worn on formal and public occasions. Wrapping it correctly was a real art, requiring careful folds and arrangement, and often a helping hand, for it was heavy and could be unwieldy. Different togas marked different roles: a plain white one for ordinary citizens, a bordered one for boys and certain officials, and a special bright one for those seeking office. Because it was awkward and warm, most people wore simpler tunics for daily life and saved the toga for when it truly mattered. Yet, for all its inconvenience, the toga was a beloved symbol of being Roman, of belonging to the city and its citizenship. To put it on was to wear, quite literally, one's place and pride in the Roman world. Rome's enormous population was fed with grain shipped from across the sea. At its height, the city of Rome held perhaps 1 million people, a staggering number for the ancient world, and feeding them was a constant and serious task. Vast quantities of grain were brought in by ship from distant provinces, especially the rich farmlands of Egypt and North Africa. Great fleets carried it across the Mediterranean to the ports near Rome, where it was unloaded and stored in huge warehouses. To keep the people content, the state even provided a regular grain dole, a ration given out to citizens so that none in the city need go hungry. Managing this flow of food was one of the great challenges of governing Rome. Behind the marble and the monuments lay this quiet, ceaseless labor: the ships, the granaries, and the daily bread that kept 1 million people fed. The Romans came to control the entire Mediterranean Sea, So complete was their power over the great inland sea that they came to call it, fondly, our sea. Their ships sailed freely from one end of it to the other, carrying grain, oil, wine, marble, and travelers between the many lands that ringed its shores. The Roman navy cleared the waters of pirates, making the sea safer for trade than it had been before or would be for long after. Every coast it touched, from Spain to Egypt to the east, lay under Roman rule. This shared sea bound the empire together as surely as the roads on land, a great blue highway at its very center. To sail it in those days was to move within a single connected world. The Mediterranean, ringed entirely by Rome, was the calm heart around which the whole empire turned. The Roman town of Pompeii was buried and preserved by a volcano. In a single day, the city of Pompeii and its neighbors were buried under ash and stone when the great volcano nearby erupted without warning. It was a terrible disaster, and the towns were lost beneath the earth for many centuries, all but forgotten. Yet in that burial lay a strange gift to later ages. Sealed away from air and weather, much of Pompeii was preserved almost as it had been on that final day. Its streets and houses, its shops and gardens, its paintings, and even loaves of bread in the ovens. When it was at last rediscovered and slowly uncovered, it offered an extraordinary window into ordinary Roman life. Through the quiet ruins of Pompeii, frozen in a moment, we can walk the very streets the Romans walked and glimpse their world exactly as they left it. On the walls of Pompeii, ancient graffiti still records ordinary voices. Among the most touching discoveries at Pompeii are the countless messages scratched and painted on its walls. Ordinary people left behind notices of all kinds: election slogans urging support for a candidate, advertisements for games and shops, declarations of love, complaints, jokes, and simple names. Someone recorded that they had been here, another praised a friend or grumbled about a rival. These small human scribbles, preserved by chance for 2,000 years, speak to us with surprising warmth and familiarity. They remind us that the Romans were people much like ourselves, who fell in love, supported their teams, advertised their wares, and could not resist writing on a handy wall. Through this humble graffiti, the quiet voices of everyday Romans reach across the centuries, ordinary and alive, suddenly very close to our own. Roman coins carried the face of the emperor across the whole empire. Money in Rome was made of metal, with coins of gold, silver, and bronze used for trade great and small. Upon them was stamped the image of the ruling emperor, along with words proclaiming his name and deeds. In a world without newspapers or photographs, these coins were a powerful way of spreading the emperor's face and message to every corner of the empire, passing through countless hands. A farmer in a distant province, who had never been near Rome, would still know the look of his emperor from the coins in his purse. They also carried images of gods, buildings, and victories. Many of these coins survive today, still bright enough to show the faces upon them. Each is a tiny portrait sent out across the ancient world, a small messenger of Roman power slipped quietly into everyday life. Roman doctors practiced surgery with finely made instruments. Medicine in Rome blended careful practice with herbal remedies and prayer. Roman doctors could treat wounds, set bones, and even perform delicate surgeries using a range of well-crafted bronze tools, some of which look surprisingly like instruments used today. They knew the value of cleanliness in treating injuries and used wine and other substances to clean wounds. The army in particular developed skilled military doctors and even hospitals to care for wounded soldiers, an early form of organized medical care. Much medical knowledge was gathered from the Greeks, whose learned physicians were highly prized in Rome. Of course, their understanding had its limits, and much remained mixed with superstition. Yet in their careful tools and their practical care, the Romans were reaching toward real medicine, easing pain and mending bodies with a patient skill that still earns our respect today. Roman cities had public toilets and a remarkable system of sewers. The Romans gave real thought to cleanliness on a grand scale. Many of their cities had public latrines, where rows of seats stood over channels of running water that carried the waste away. Beneath the streets ran sewers, some of them large enough to walk through, draining the city and keeping it cleaner than most places would be for many centuries afterward. The greatest of these drains in Rome was so well built that parts of it still function today. Fresh water flowed in through the aqueducts, and used water flowed out through the sewers, a thoughtful and impressive cycle. Such public sanitation was one of the quiet comforts of Roman city life. It is not the grandest of their achievements, but in its way, it is among the most civilized, a steady, unseen care for the health of the whole community. The Romans celebrated a joyful midwinter festival of feasting and gifts. In the darkest days of December, Rome held its most beloved festival, a holiday of feasting, games, and merriment that lasted for several days. During this happy time, the usual order of things was gently turned upside down. People gave one another small gifts, wore festive clothes instead of the formal toga, and enjoyed a spirit of freedom and good cheer. Even enslaved people were given a holiday and served a feast. Candles and greenery brightened the homes, and the whole city gave itself over to celebration in the cold heart of winter. Many have noticed how much this midwinter festival of light, gifts, and feasting resembles the holidays we keep in that same season today. It was a warm and generous time, a burst of joy and kindness shared against the darkness, when Rome set aside its cares to celebrate together. Roman builders raised great triumphal arches to celebrate their victories. Across the empire, the Romans built grand stone archways to commemorate military triumphs and important events. These arches, often standing across a road or in a public square, were richly carved with scenes of battles, processions, and captured spoils, and inscribed with the names and deeds they honored. People passed beneath them every day, reminded of the glory of Rome and its leaders. Several of these magnificent arches still stand after nearly 2,000 years, their carvings worn but proud. So admired was their design that many later nations built triumphal arches of their own in imitation, and they can now be seen in cities far from Rome. To walk beneath one of these ancient arches is to pass through a doorway built to outlast the very victories it celebrates, a quiet monument to memory carved in enduring stone. A tall carved column told the story of an emperor's wars in a winding spiral. Among Rome's most remarkable monuments is a great stone column whose surface is covered from bottom to top with a continuous spiral band of carving. Winding upward like a scroll unrolled into the sky, it depicts in vivid detail the story of an emperor's military campaign, the soldiers marching, building, fighting, and the people they met. It is, in a sense, an ancient picture story, told in stone, full of small, lively scenes. The carving is so detailed that it remains one of our richest sources for how Roman soldiers looked and worked. The column has stood for many centuries and survives still. To follow its spiral upward is to read a long tale carved patiently in marble, an emperor's wish that the deeds of his army should be remembered, climbing forever toward the heavens. Some Roman emperors were wise, while others became infamous. The long line of emperors held many different sorts of men. A few were thoughtful and capable rulers who governed well and were loved by their people. One was even a philosopher who wrote down his calm and noble reflections on how to live, a book still read and treasured today. Others, however, became notorious for their cruelty, vanity, or strange behavior, and their names have come down to us as warnings. Because an emperor held such enormous power, the character of the man upon the throne mattered greatly to the lives of millions. A period of several good emperors in a row gave Rome one of its happiest and most peaceful ages. The story of the emperors is, in the end, a deeply human one, of power held by people who, like all of us, could be wise or foolish, gentle or harsh. The philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote a book of quiet wisdom. Among all the emperors, one is remembered not for conquests or grand buildings, but for his thoughts. While leading his armies on the distant frontier, this emperor kept a private journal, writing down gentle reflections to steady and guide himself. He reminded himself to be patient, to be kind, to accept what he could not change, and to do his duty calmly. He never meant these notes for others to read, yet they survived, and they have comforted and inspired countless people ever since. His simple, honest words about living well still speak softly across the ages. It is a moving thought that the most lasting legacy of a Roman emperor should be not marble or gold, but a quiet little book of wisdom, written by lamplight in a tent, reminding us all to meet our days with a calm and steady heart. The Romans loved the theater and watched both comedies and dramas. Across the empire stood great stone theaters, built in graceful half circles where audiences gathered to watch plays. Comedies full of mistaken identities and clever servants were especially popular, drawing laughter from the crowds, while grander dramas told stories of gods and heroes. Actors wore masks to show their characters, with different masks for the young and old, the happy and the sad, so that even those far back could follow along. The theaters were cleverly shaped so that a voice from the stage could carry clearly to the highest seats. Going to the theater was a favorite entertainment, free and open to many. Some of these ancient theaters survive so well that plays are still performed in them today. To sit in one is to share a seat across 2,000 years, with Romans who came simply to enjoy a good story. Roman craftsmen learned to blow glass into delicate and beautiful shapes. Glassmaking flourished in the Roman world, and at some point craftsmen discovered how to blow glass, gathering a blob of molten glass on the end of a tube and shaping it with their breath into bottles, cups, and bowls. This was a great advance, making glass vessels far quicker and cheaper to produce, so that even ordinary households could own them. Roman glass came in many colors and forms, some plain and useful, others wonderfully fine and intricate, prized as luxuries. Many lovely Roman glass objects survive, some with a soft, shimmering sheen given them by their long centuries in the earth. It is a delicate art, this catching of light in glass, and the Romans practiced it beautifully. To hold a Roman cup of glass is to hold something shaped by an artisan's breath 2,000 years ago. The Romans honored their dead with tombs lining the roads outside their cities. By custom and law, the Romans did not bury their dead within the city walls, so the roads leading out of their towns were lined with tombs and monuments. These ranged from simple markers to grand and elaborate structures, and they often carried inscriptions naming the dead and recalling their lives. Travelers entering or leaving a city would pass these memorials, reading the names of those who had gone before. Families visited the tombs of their ancestors, bringing offerings and sharing meals in their memory, keeping the dead a gentle part of life. Many of these roadside tombs survive, their quiet inscriptions still legible. There is something peaceful in this custom, that the dead should rest beside the roads, neither shut away nor forgotten, but greeting each traveler softly, their names and memories carried on by all who passed. Roman ships carried goods and travelers all across the empire. Trade was the lifeblood of the Roman world, and across the Mediterranean and along the great rivers moved a constant traffic of ships. They carried grain and oil, wine in great jars, marble and metal, cloth, pottery, and countless other goods between distant lands. Merchant vessels with broad sails rode the seasonal winds, while in port, cargoes were loaded and unloaded at busy harbors. Goods made in one corner of the empire might be used in another far away, so that a cup or a coin could travel 1,000 miles. The Romans built fine harbors, lighthouses, and warehouses to support this trade. Through it, the whole empire was knit together by the quiet movement of goods. To stand at a Roman dockside was to watch the wealth of the world arrive by sea, sail by sail, in an endless, peaceful procession. The Romans absorbed much of their art and learning from the Greeks. When Rome conquered the Greek world, it found there a culture of great beauty and wisdom, and rather than sweep it away, the Romans embraced it. They admired Greek art, copied Greek statues, and studied Greek ideas in philosophy, science, and literature. Wealthy Romans hired Greek tutors for their children and filled their homes with Greek works. Their gods came to be told of in Greek stories, and their poets drew on Greek models. In this way, Rome became a great keeper and spreader of Greek learning, carrying it across a wider world than Greece had ever ruled. It was said in a famous phrase that captive Greece took its rough conqueror captive, winning Rome over with its arts. Through this gentle conquest of culture, much of the wisdom and beauty of Greece was preserved and passed on by the Romans. A Roman poet wrote a great epic about the legendary origins of Rome. In the age of the first emperor, a celebrated poet composed a long and beautiful epic telling of a hero who, after the fall of a great city, journeyed across the sea to find a new home in Italy, becoming an ancestor of the Roman people. This grand poem wove together legend, adventure, and the destiny of Rome into verses of lasting beauty. It became the great national poem of the Romans, studied in schools and loved for centuries. Its stories of wandering, loss, love, and fate moved its readers deeply, and many of its lines became famous. Though the poet, by tradition, was not fully satisfied with it, the work outlived him by ages. Through this epic, the Romans gave themselves a noble and poetic origin, a story of their beginnings told in some of the finest verse the ancient world produced. Roman education trained boys, and some girls, to read, write, and speak well. The children of those who could afford it were sent to school or taught at home, beginning with reading, writing, and arithmetic. As they grew, boys especially studied literature and the art of speaking well in public, for skill in speech was highly valued in Roman public life. Lessons could be long and strict, and discipline was firm, but a good education opened the way to honor and influence. Wax tablets served for daily practice, and beloved works of poetry were learned by heart. Some girls, too, were educated, particularly in wealthier families, and a number of Roman women were noted for their learning. Behind the great speeches and writings of Rome lay this patient schooling. The Roman respect for the spoken and written word began here, in the quiet, careful lessons of childhood. The general Hannibal famously led an army with elephants over the mountains. In one of the most dramatic episodes of Roman history, Rome faced a brilliant enemy general from the rival city of Carthage. Seeking to strike at Rome itself, this commander led his army on an astonishing march, crossing high and snowy mountain passes, bringing with him not only soldiers, but war elephants. It was a bold and difficult feat, and many were lost on the harsh journey. For years afterward, he campaigned in Italy, winning great victories and troubling Rome deeply. In the end, however, Rome prevailed, and the long rivalry between the two cities was settled in Rome's favor. The image of elephants crossing the icy mountains has never been forgotten, a vivid emblem of daring against the odds. It remains one of the great stories of the ancient world, told and retold for over 2,000 years. Rome and Carthage fought long wars that decided the fate of the Western world. For many years, Rome and the powerful trading city of Carthage struggled against each other in a series of long and difficult wars, contesting the lands and seas of the Western Mediterranean. The fighting ranged across sea and land, through great battles and hard sieges, testing both cities to their limits. Rome suffered terrible defeats, but refused to give in, rebuilding its forces again and again with stubborn determination. In the end, after generations of conflict, Rome triumphed, and its great rival was utterly defeated. This victory opened the way for Rome to become the master of the Western world. The long contest had been one of the gravest tests Rome ever faced, and surviving it shaped its character. From that hard-won triumph, Rome rose toward the vast power it would hold for centuries to come. An emperor built a great wall across the north of Britain. At the far northern edge of the empire, in the cold hills of Britain, the Emperor Hadrian ordered the building of a long stone wall, stretching from one coast to the other. It ran for many miles across the land, guarded by forts, towers, and gates, and manned by soldiers drawn from across the empire. The wall marked the frontier, the very edge of the Roman world, beyond which lay lands Rome did not rule. Soldiers stationed there lived in small forts, far from the warmth of the south, keeping watch over the quiet, misty country. Letters they left behind speak of ordinary things: socks and sandals sent from home, invitations to birthday parties. Much of the wall still stands today, winding over the green hills. It remains a haunting reminder of how far Rome reached, and where at last its great empire came to an end. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents. From the rainy frontiers of Britain in the northwest to the deserts of the Middle East and along the whole northern coast of Africa, the empire spread across an immense expanse of land. It touched 3 continents and embraced a great variety of peoples, climates, and cultures, all under Roman rule. A traveler could journey for months and never leave Roman territory, using the same coins, the same roads, and the same language of administration the whole way. Few states in all of history have governed so much for so long. This vast reach is hard to picture. A single realm encircling an entire sea, binding together lands as different as Egypt and Scotland. Yet for a remarkable span of time, all of it answered to Rome, held together by roads, soldiers, law, and the quiet habit of belonging to one great empire. For 2 centuries, much of the Roman world enjoyed a lasting peace. There came a long period, beginning under the first emperor, when the heart of the empire was largely free of major war within its borders. This Roman peace lasted for roughly 200 years and allowed trade, travel, and city life to flourish as rarely before. Goods and ideas moved freely along safe roads and seas, towns grew and prospered, and people could journey vast distances in relative safety. It was not a perfect peace, for wars still flared on the distant frontiers, and not everyone shared equally in its blessings. But for the ordinary business of life across much of the empire, it was a remarkably calm and stable age. People built, traded, learned, and raised families under its shelter. This long quiet was perhaps Rome's greatest gift to those who lived within it. 2 unhurried centuries of order and ease. In time, Roman citizenship was granted to nearly all free people of the empire. At first, full Roman citizenship was a prized possession held by relatively few, but over the long centuries it spread ever wider. People in the provinces could earn it through service or have it granted to their communities. At last, an emperor extended citizenship to almost all free inhabitants of the empire in a single sweeping act. This meant that a free person in distant Egypt or Gaul could now share the same legal standing as someone born in Rome itself. It was a remarkable idea that so vast and varied a population could all be citizens of one state. Citizenship brought rights and protections under Roman law, and a sense of belonging to something far larger than one's own town. In this slow widening of who counted as Roman lay one of the empire's most quietly significant achievements. The Romans had a clever public postal and travel system along their roads. To carry official messages and move officials swiftly across the vast empire, the Romans set up a system of relay stations along the main roads. At regular intervals stood posts where fresh horses and resting places were kept ready, so that a rider or carriage could change mounts and press on without long delay. In this way, news and orders could travel surprisingly fast across great distances, knitting the far-flung empire together. Inns and stables served weary travelers along the way, and milestones marked the miles. This network kept the government informed and connected, allowing Rome to rule lands thousands of miles apart. It was an early kind of postal and travel service, quietly efficient. Along these same roads moved not only messengers, but merchants, soldiers, and pilgrims, all carried forward by the steady, well-ordered rhythm of Roman travel. The Roman built an early kind of shopping center with many small shops. In the heart of Rome, one emperor built a grand structure of several levels, filled with rows of small shops and offices, opening onto walkways and a great hall. Here, merchants sold their wares, and people came to buy food, goods, and supplies, much as we might visit a market or a mall today. Built of brick and concrete into the side of a hill, it was a marvel of design, with its many arched shop fronts rising in tiers. The remains still stand, remarkably well preserved, and walking through them, one can easily imagine the bustle of ancient commerce. It is a strikingly familiar sight, this ancient gathering of shops under one great roof. The Romans, with their love of city life and trade, had created something very like the shopping centers we know, nearly 2,000 years ago. The Romans measured the day in hours that changed length with the seasons. The Roman day was divided into hours, but in a way quite different from ours. They split the time of daylight into 12 hours, and the night into 12 more, no matter the season. This meant that in summer, when the days were long, the daytime hours were long as well, while in winter they grew short. The hours of day and night were rarely equal, stretching and shrinking with the turning year. They told the time by sundials when the sun shone and by water clocks, which let water drip steadily to mark the passing hours when it did not. There was a gentle, natural quality to this way of keeping time, bound to the rhythm of light and dark. The Roman hour was not a fixed thing ticking on a machine, but a living measure that breathed with the seasons. Romans visited the barber not just for a haircut, but for news and gossip. The barber shop was a popular gathering place in any Roman town, where men came to have their hair cut and their faces shaved with iron razors. But it was about more than grooming. The barber's was a place to sit, to wait one's turn, and to exchange the latest news and gossip with neighbors and friends. Fashions in hair and beards changed over time, following the styles set by emperors, whose looks were copied across the empire. Shaving with the razors of the day was no small thing, and a careful barber was valued. To pass an hour at the barber's, talking and listening amid the snipping and scraping, was a small and ordinary pleasure of Roman life. It is an easy scene to picture, little change from such places today, warm with conversation and the comfortable ease of familiar company. Roman women styled their hair in elaborate ways and used cosmetics. Fashionable Roman women, especially the wealthy, took great care with their appearance, arranging their hair in intricate styles that changed with the times, sometimes piled high in curls and braids that required the patient work of skilled attendants. Some even wore hairpieces and wigs to add fullness, and hair from distant lands was prized. They used cosmetics to lighten the skin, color the cheeks and lips, and darken the eyes, kept in small pots and applied with care. Polished metal mirrors let them admire the result. Perfumes and scented oils completed the daily ritual of beauty. Much effort and artistry went into these preparations, a gentle vanity shared across the ages. To picture a Roman lady at her morning toilette, her maids dressing her hair by the soft light of a window, is to see something tender and timeless in the care people take with beauty. The Romans enjoyed games of chance and were fond of throwing dice. In their leisure hours, Romans loved to play games, and among the most popular were games of dice and small games of strategy played on boards. Dice, much like our own, marked with spots from 1 to 6, have been found all across the empire, in homes, taverns, and army camps alike. People gambled on the throws, sometimes for high stakes, though betting was often officially frowned upon and only freely allowed during the midwinter festival. Soldiers passed the long hours of duty with such games, and friends played them over wine. Board games of skill, in which pieces were moved and captured, were also much enjoyed. These simple pleasures reveal an ordinary human side of the Romans, who, like people everywhere, loved the small excitement of a game. The rattle of dice was a familiar sound in many a Roman evening. The Romans welcomed many local gods into their wide and tolerant religion. As Rome's empire grew to include many peoples, it generally allowed them to keep worshiping their own gods, and often welcomed those gods into Roman religion itself. The Romans were not, on the whole, eager to stamp out other faiths, so long as people also showed proper respect to the gods of the state. New gods from the eastern provinces grew popular in Rome, their mysterious rites and promises drawing many followers. This easy tolerance helped bind the diverse empire together, for people could be Roman without abandoning their own beliefs. The gods of conquered lands often found new worshippers far from home. There was a certain gentle wisdom in this openness, a willingness to make room for many ways of honoring the divine. Rome's vast religious life was a great mingling of faiths, gathered peacefully from across the known world. A small new faith called Christianity slowly spread across the empire. Beginning in a distant eastern province, a new religion gradually made its way through the Roman world, carried along the same roads and sea lanes that bound the empire together. For a long time, its followers were few, and at times they faced suspicion and persecution from the authorities. Yet the faith continued to spread quietly, from city to city, among rich and poor alike. And in time, it grew from a small movement into a great presence within the empire. Eventually, an emperor himself came to favor it, and it went on to become the official religion of the Roman state. This was one of the most far reaching changes in all of Roman history, with effects that would last long after the empire itself had passed. From small and humble beginnings, the new faith rose slowly to reshape the Roman world. An emperor founded a new capital city in the east. As the empire aged, one emperor decided to build a grand new capital far to the east, on the site of an older city, beside a narrow strait between two seas. He adorned it with fine buildings, forums, and monuments, making it a worthy second Rome. Beautifully placed for trade and defense, the new city flourished and grew rich and powerful. In time, it became the chief city of the empire, especially of its eastern half. While the old city of Rome declined, this eastern capital thrived, and it would remain a great center of power and culture for many centuries to come. The founding of this city marked a shift in the empire's heart, eastward toward wealthier and more populous lands. It was a quiet turning point, the rise of a new Rome that would long outlast the old one in the West. The vast empire was eventually divided into eastern and western halves. As the centuries passed and the empire grew ever harder to govern as a single whole, it came to be divided for administration into an eastern part and a western part, each with its own ruler. This made the great realm easier to defend and manage, with leaders closer to the troubled frontiers. The wealthier, more populous East, centered on the new eastern capital, remained strong and prosperous. The West, with its older city of Rome, faced greater pressures and gradually weakened. Though the two halves were still thought of as one empire, in practice they drifted apart, each going its own way. This division shaped the later history of the Roman world profoundly. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the empire had simply grown too vast for one pair of hands, and so the great body of Rome was gently parted in two. The Western Roman Empire slowly faded after long centuries of power. The western half of the empire, weakened by many troubles, gradually lost its strength over a long and difficult period. Pressures along the frontiers grew. Peoples from beyond the borders moved into Roman lands, and the central government in the West could no longer hold things firmly together. The change came not in a single moment, but as a slow unraveling, as authority faded and new kingdoms took shape within the old Roman territories. At last, the line of emperors in the West came quietly to its end. Yet much of Roman life, its language, law, roads, and customs, carried on under the new rulers, woven into the world that followed. The fading of the Western Empire was less a sudden fall than a long, gradual passing, the gentle setting of a sun that had shone over the Western world for many hundreds of years. The very last emperor in the West bore the name of Rome's founder. In a quiet turn of history that seems almost poetic, the final emperor to rule in the West happened to carry the name of Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome itself. He was only a boy when he held the title, and his reign was brief, ending without violence as power passed to others. So the long story of Roman rule in the West, which legend said had begun with a Romulus, ended with one too, the name bracketing the whole great tale from beginning to end. There is something gently fitting in this small coincidence of names, a quiet rhyme across more than 1,000 years of history. The boy emperor lived on afterward in peaceful retirement. With him, the old line of Western emperors slipped softly into the past, its long chapter closed beneath a familiar and ancient name. The Eastern Empire lived on for another 1,000 years. Though the Western Empire faded, its eastern half did not. Centered on the great eastern capital, it continued as a rich and powerful state for many more centuries, preserving Roman law, titles, and traditions even as it grew distinct in language and character. Its people still called themselves Romans, and in a real sense, the Roman Empire endured in the East for 1,000 years beyond the fall of the West. It saw great emperors and beautiful art, faced many trials, and remained a major power and a guardian of ancient learning. Through all those centuries, a living thread of Rome continued unbroken in the East. We often imagine Rome ending long ago, yet in this Eastern realm, the empire quietly carried on for an astonishingly long time, an enduring echo of Rome that outlasted the old city's glory by 10 long centuries. The Romans gave us the calendar and the alphabet we largely use today. So much of daily life still carries the quiet imprint of Rome. The letters used to write many of the world's languages, including this one, descend directly from the Roman alphabet, shaped by their hands 2,000 years ago. The calendar that orders our year with its 12 months and its leap days comes to us from Roman reforms, and several month names are Latin still. Even many of our words in countless languages are Roman in origin. These are not relics kept in museums, but living tools we use every single day, often without a thought for where they came from. Each time we write a letter or name a month, we are using a small gift handed down from ancient Rome. In this gentle, unnoticed way, the Romans remain a quiet presence in the ordinary fabric of modern life. Roman engineering still stands today in bridges, walls, and buildings. The skill of Roman builders was so great that an astonishing amount of their work survives, still standing after 2,000 years. Stone bridges they raised still carry traffic across rivers. Aqueduct arches still stride across valleys. Walls, gates, theaters, and temples endure in cities across what was once their empire. Some of their buildings have never fallen out of use at all, sheltering people and gatherings across all the centuries between. This remarkable durability is a testament to their care, their materials, and their understanding of how to build for the ages. To come upon a Roman bridge or wall today, weathered but firm, is to touch the ancient world directly. The Romans built not just for their own time, but, as it turned out, for ours as well, leaving solid, patient monuments that have quietly outlasted empire after empire. Rome itself never died, but became one of the world's great living cities. Unlike many ancient capitals that fell into ruin and were abandoned, the city of Rome was never truly lost. Through all the long centuries after its empire faded, people continued to live there, and it remained an important center, growing and changing with the times. Today, it is a great and vibrant city, where ancient ruins stand quietly among modern streets, and where people go about their lives in the shadow of 2,000-year-old monuments. One can sit at a cafe beside a Roman temple or walk past the Colosseum on the way to work. The old and the new live side by side in a way found in few other places. Rome earned its title as the Eternal City, for it has simply never stopped being Rome, an ancient heart still beating gently at the center of a living world. Rome had teams of watchmen who guarded the city and fought fires at night. In so vast and crowded a city, built closely of wood and brick, fire was a constant danger, and crime did not sleep. So Rome had organized bands of men who patrolled the streets through the night, keeping watch over the sleeping city. They served as both a night watch and a fire brigade, carrying buckets, pumps, hooks, and blankets to fight the flames that so often broke out. They looked for fires, raised the alarm, and worked to put out the blaze before it could spread. They also kept an eye out for thieves and trouble in the dark streets. It is a reassuring thought, as one drifts towards sleep, that even in ancient Rome, watchmen walked the quiet streets through the night, guarding the city and its dreamers while they rested, ready to keep the darkness safe. Luxuries from as far away as China reached the markets of Rome. The reach of Roman trade was astonishing, stretching even beyond the empire's own vast borders. From far to the east came precious silk, carried over enormous distances along the great overland routes and across the seas, until it reached the wealthy of Rome, who prized it greatly. Spices, gems, fine cloth, and other treasures arrived from distant India and lands beyond. Romans paid dearly for these exotic goods, and some moralists grumbled at the fortune spent on Eastern luxuries. Yet the trade flowed on, linking Rome through many hands to civilizations halfway across the world. It is a remarkable thought that a Roman lady might wear silk first spun in distant China, passed along a chain of traders across deserts and oceans. Through these long, quiet threads of commerce, the ancient world was far more connected than we often imagine. The Romans were tourists, too, who traveled to see ancient wonders. With their empire at peace and their roads and sea lanes open, Romans of means enjoyed traveling to see famous sights, much as we do today. They journeyed to admire the great monuments of Greece and the East, and especially to marvel at the wonders of Egypt, which were already ancient even to them. Visitors climbed among the pyramids, gazed at the great temples, and gathered at famous statues. Some even scratched their names or a few words upon the monuments, an early form of the tourist signature. They bought small souvenirs and hired guides to tell them the old stories. There is something delightfully familiar in this picture of Roman travelers, guidebooks of a sort in hand, gazing up at the pyramids in wonder. Across the ages, the simple human wish to go and see the marvels of the world was already alive and well. Roman soldiers could lock their shields together into a protective shell. The legions were famous for their clever battlefield formations, and one of the most striking was a defensive shell formed entirely of shields. The soldiers in the front held their shields before them, while those behind and around raised theirs overhead and to the sides, overlapping them tightly to cover the whole group, top and flanks alike. This created a kind of moving roof of shields, protecting the men beneath from arrows, stones, and missiles raining down. Under this shell, they could advance steadily toward an enemy or a wall, sheltered as they went. It took great discipline and practice to form and hold, every man moving in concert with the rest. This image of a tight formation of shields, advancing as one armored shell, captures perfectly the Roman genius for order and teamwork, turning many separate soldiers into a single, patient, unbreakable whole. Many great cities of today began as Roman towns. As the Romans spread across their empire, they founded and built up countless towns, often settling retired soldiers in them or developing existing settlements into proper Roman cities. A great many of these have never ceased to be inhabited, growing over the centuries into major cities of the modern world. Capitals and great centers across Europe trace their origins to a Roman foundation, their oldest streets sometimes still following the Roman plan. Beneath the modern pavements lie Roman walls, baths, and forums, occasionally uncovered by builders. The very names of some cities echo their Roman past. It is a quiet wonder to think that millions of people today live in cities first laid out by Roman hands, walking unknowingly above the foundations the Romans set. The empire's gone, but the towns it planted took root and grew and flourished still across the lands it once ruled. Roman towns across the empire were built to a similar, orderly plan. Wherever the Romans founded a new town, they tended to lay it out in a familiar, orderly way, with two main streets crossing at the center and the other streets forming a neat grid. At the heart stood the Forum, the public square, surrounded by the important buildings, a hall for law and business, temples, and offices. Most towns of any size also had public baths, and larger ones might have a theater or an arena. This meant that a Roman arriving in a strange town far from home would find it reassuringly familiar, able to locate the forum and the baths with ease. This shared pattern of city life spread across the whole empire, carrying Roman ways of living to distant lands. It gave the vast and varied empire a comforting sameness, so that to be in a Roman town was anywhere, to feel a little at home. The name Caesar became a title for rulers across the world for centuries. Such was the fame of Julius Caesar and the emperors who followed that his very name turned into a word meaning ruler or emperor. The emperors of Rome took it as a title, and long after Rome, mighty rulers in other lands adopted versions of it for themselves, wishing to share in its grandeur and to claim the legacy of Rome. In several languages, the words for emperor descended directly from the name Caesar, so a single Roman family name echoed down the centuries and across many countries, spoken by rulers who lived 1,000 years and 1,000 miles from the man himself. It is a striking measure of Rome's long shadow, that one ancient name should become, for so many and for so long, the very word for supreme power, carried far beyond the world that first gave it meaning. Romans sealed their letters and documents with rings carved as personal stamps. Many Romans wore a ring set with a carved stone or design that served as a personal signature. To seal a letter or mark a document as truly their own, they would press this ring into a small blob of soft wax, leaving behind a clear and distinctive imprint. Each person's seal was unique, a private mark of identity and authority, hard to copy. These signet rings were both useful and beautiful, often finely carved with images of gods, animals, or personal emblems. A sealed and stamped document carried the weight of its owner's word. It is a charming and very human detail, this little ring pressed into the wax, a way of saying across the distance that a message was genuinely one's own. Many such rings survive, their tiny carvings still sharp, small personal signatures left by Romans long gone. Rome had public libraries where people could read and study. The Romans valued learning and reading, and their cities held public libraries where scrolls and books were kept for people to use. The wealthy also gathered private libraries in their homes, a mark of culture and taste. Books in those days were mostly long scrolls, unrolled to be read, though over time a new form arose, with flat pages bound together along one edge, much closer to the books we know today. This new form was easier to handle and to search, and it gradually grew in popularity. Copying books was slow work done by hand, so each one was precious. In the quiet halls of a Roman library, readers could unroll the words of poets, historians, and philosophers. It is a peaceful image, this ancient love of reading, the same gentle pleasure of losing oneself in a good book, shared with us across 2,000 years. A great Roman speaker's letters and speeches still survive to teach us today. Among the Romans, the ability to speak well was prized above almost all other skills, and the greatest of their orators became famous and powerful through the force of their words. One in particular was so admired that a vast number of his speeches, letters, and writings were preserved and studied for centuries afterward, shaping how people learned to write and argue. Through his many letters, we can glimpse the daily concerns, friendships, and worries of a real Roman across the ages, ordinary and human. His polished Latin became a model that students imitated for hundreds of years. It is a remarkable thing that the private letters and public words of a single Roman should survive so fully, letting his voice speak on. Through such writings, we do not merely read about the Romans, but hear them speaking clearly and personally to us. A Roman writer gathered the knowledge of his age into a vast encyclopedia. Driven by boundless curiosity, one Roman set out to collect everything known in his time about the natural world into a single enormous work. He gathered facts about the heavens, the earth, animals, plants, minerals, medicines, and the arts, drawing on a great many earlier writers. The result was a vast encyclopedia, one of the largest works to survive from the ancient world, full of fascinating information, shrewd observation, and the occasional charming error. For centuries afterward, people turned to it to learn about the world. Its author was so eager in his curiosity that, by tradition, he died going to observe a great volcanic eruption too closely. His great book remains a treasure, a window into how the Romans understood their world. In it lives the same restless wish to know and to record that drives human curiosity still. Roman surveyors used clever tools to lay out their famously straight roads and towns. The remarkable straightness of Roman roads and the neat grids of their towns were no accident but the work of skilled surveyors using careful instruments. Their chief tool was a simple but effective device for marking out perfectly straight lines and right angles by sighting along hanging cords. With it, they could lay out roads, fields, town streets, and the foundations of buildings with impressive precision across the landscape. They planned their routes thoughtfully, choosing the firmest and most direct paths. This patient, exacting work lay behind much of Rome's famous engineering, unseen but essential. It is the quiet skill beneath the grandeur, men with simple tools and great care, sighting along their lines under the open sky, setting out the shape of roads and cities that would, in some cases, still be followed 2,000 years later. Precision, patiently applied, was a Roman art. The Romans built powerful cranes lifted by the strength of walking men. To raise the enormous stone blocks of their great buildings, the Romans devised cranes worked by human power in an ingenious way. The largest were driven by great wooden wheels, like treadmills, inside which men walked steadily, turning the wheel and winding up a rope to lift tremendous weights. By the patient walking of a few men, blocks far heavier than they could ever carry were hoisted high into the air and set carefully into place. Pulleys multiplied their strength, letting a small team raise loads of many tons. This combination of simple machines and steady human effort built temples, monuments, and walls that still astonish us. There's something quietly impressive in it. Not brute force, but cleverness and patience. A few men walking calmly within a wheel, and stone by lifted stone, the great monuments of Rome slowly rising toward the sky. Wealthy Romans escaped the city to peaceful country villas and seaside retreats. For those who could afford it, the bustle and heat of the city could be left behind for the calm of a country estate or a house by the sea. These villas were places of rest and pleasure, set among gardens, fields, and vineyards, or looking out over the water. There, away from the crowds, a Roman could read, walk, hunt, dine with friends, and simply enjoy the quiet of the countryside. Fashionable seaside towns drew the wealthy seeking leisure and relaxation, much like resorts today. The villas were often beautifully built and decorated, designed for comfort and for taking in the views. To retreat to such a place was to find peace and renewal away from the demands of public life. It is a gentle and familiar longing, this wish to leave the busy city behind for a while, to rest somewhere green and still. Roman weddings gave us customs we still keep at marriages today. When a Roman couple married, their wedding was marked by customs and symbols, some of which feel surprisingly familiar. The bride often wore a special veil and was led in a happy procession to her new home, accompanied by torches, music, and the good wishes of family and friends. A ring was given as a token of the union, worn upon a particular finger, for the Romans believed a delicate connection ran from it straight to the heart. The joining of right hands symbolized the couple's bond and promise. There were feasts, blessings, and the scattering of nuts and sweets for good fortune. Many of these gentle traditions echo down to weddings of our own day. It is a tender continuity, this celebration of love and union, dressed in customs so old yet so close to ours, a reminder of how little the human heart has changed. At Roman funerals, families carried images of their ancestors in procession. The Romans honored their ancestors deeply, and at the funeral of an important person, this reverence was beautifully displayed. Family members or hired mourners would carry or wear images representing the dead person's forebears, so that the ancestors seemed to gather once more to accompany one of their own. In this way, a funeral became a gathering of the whole family across the generations, the living and the long dead together. These ancestral images were normally kept with honor in the home, brought out on such solemn occasions. The procession moved with music and ceremony, and speeches praised the deeds of the departed. It was a moving way of remembering, of feeling that the dead were not lost, but joined to a long, unbroken line. Through this gentle custom, the Romans kept their ancestors close, present, and honored among the family they had left behind. Rome's ideas of shared government have inspired nations ever since. Long after the empire passed, the Roman Republic, with its elected officials, its Senate, and its ideal of citizens sharing in government, remained a powerful example to later ages. When peoples in much later centuries sought to build governments based on shared power and the rule of law, they often looked back to Rome for inspiration and borrowed its words and forms. Terms like Senate and Republic, and many ideas about citizenship and law, were taken up anew. The Roman model, studied and admired, helped shape how many modern nations chose to govern themselves. It is a profound legacy, this gift of political ideas, perhaps as lasting as any road or wall. The thoughtful experiments of those ancient citizens in governing themselves echoed forward across the centuries, quietly helping to shape the freedoms and institutions of a world they could never have foreseen. In Rome today, you can still see the ancient symbol of the city everywhere. The old Romans marked their public works with a short set of letters, standing for the Senate and the people of Rome, a proud emblem of the city and its citizens. Remarkably, this same ancient symbol can still be seen all over the city of Rome today, stamped on manhole covers, fountains, and public buildings, carrying its 2,000-year-old message into the present. The famous image of the she-wolf with the twin founders also remains a beloved emblem of the city. To wander through Rome is to meet these ancient signs again and again, quietly insisting that this is still, after all this time, the same city. There's a gentle thread of continuity in it, unbroken across the ages. The symbols the Romans loved are loved still, woven into the daily life of the living city they named. The Romans knew that great things are built slowly, with patience. There's an old saying, well known in many languages, that Rome was not built in a day, and it captures something deeply true about how the Romans achieved what they did. Their empire, their city, their roads and monuments were not the work of a single moment, but of long, patient effort across many centuries. Stone was laid upon stone year after year. The empire grew gradually through steady labor and persistence, rather than sudden leaps. The Romans understood the value of patience, of building carefully for the long term, of work that might outlast its makers. It is a calming and wise idea to rest upon, that the greatest things are made slowly, with care, over time. Nothing worthwhile need be rushed. Like Rome itself, what is built to last is built gently, patiently, a little at a time. And so, after all these centuries, Rome remains with us still. The empire of Rome rose, flourished, and faded long ago. Yet, in countless quiet ways, it has never truly left us. It lives in the words we speak and the letters we write, in our calendars and our laws, in the roads beneath old cities and the arches still standing against the sky. It lives in ideas of citizenship and government, in the buildings that inspire our own, in stories told and retold across the ages. The Romans, who valued order, beauty, and endurance, built a world that has outlasted them by far, woven gently into the fabric of our own. Their voices reach us through their writings, their faces through their statues, their lives through the things they left behind. The eternal city sleeps and wakes and lives on, and the long story of Rome, like all the best stories, simply continues quietly into the present and beyond. Tonight we wandered together through the long and gentle history of Rome. We walked the busy forum and the quiet country roads, stood beneath the great arches and the dome of the Pantheon, and rested in cool courtyards where fountains played. We met emperors and soldiers, builders and poets, children with their charms and families, gathered for supper in the lamplight. We followed the roads outward to distant frontiers and watched the slow turning of the centuries until the great empire faded softly into the world that came after. And through it all ran Rome's patient genius for building things that last. There is nothing left now to do or to know. When you are ready, another quiet journey will be waiting here for you, ready to carry you gently onward into another evening. If these calm hours help you rest, a soft follow helps other tired minds find this peaceful place to land. But for now, simply let it all fade. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts grow soft and dim, and let the last warm light settle over the sleeping hills of Rome. There is nothing to hold on to and nowhere you need to be. Rest well and sweet dreams.